The elevator doors slid open with a soft mechanical whisper, revealing the sterile white corridors of Mount Sinai Hospital's third floor. Victoria Sterling stepped out, her designer heels clicking against the polished linoleum with the same authority that had intimidated Wall Street executives for over a decade. At 38, she commanded respect in boardrooms where billion-dollar decisions were made daily. Her tailored Armani suit, platinum Cartier watch, and perfectly styled blonde hair spoke of a woman who had clawed her way to the top of one of the most ruthless industries in the world. Victoria checked her phone as she walked, scrolling through urgent emails that demanded her immediate attention. A merger in Tokyo needed her approval. The London markets were showing unexpected volatility. Her assistant had sent 17 messages in the past hour alone. This hospital visit was an unwelcome interruption to her meticulously planned day. She was here to visit Robert Kellerman, Sterling Capital's chief technology officer, who had suffered a mild heart attack 3 days prior. It was a courtesy call, nothing more. Robert was valuable to the company, and maintaining appearances of concern for key employees was good for corporate image. Victoria had calculated exactly 20 minutes for this visit before her next meeting with potential investors from Singapore. The ICU was located at the end of the corridor, past the pediatric ward. Victoria's focus remained fixed on her phone screen, mentally rehearsing the talking points for her upcoming presentation, when something extraordinary happened. Time seemed to slow, the way it does in moments that forever divide your life into before and after. 2 little girls, perhaps 8 years old, sat on plastic chairs outside one of the patient rooms. They were identical twins, with the same delicate bone structure, the same stubborn chin, the same defiant blue eyes that Victoria saw every morning in her mirror. But it wasn't just a resemblance. It was like looking at photographs of herself as a child, photographs she had burned 20 years ago in an attempt to erase her past. Victoria stopped walking. Her phone slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering against the floor. The sound echoed in the quiet corridor, but she barely heard it. She stood frozen, staring at these 2 little girls who couldn't possibly exist, who shouldn't exist, who were impossible. The girl on the left looked up first, noticing Victoria's intense stare. Her blue eyes, so achingly familiar, held a mixture of curiosity and wariness. She nudged her sister, who also looked up. Both girls regarded Victoria with identical expressions of polite confusion. "Ma'am, are you okay?" the first girl asked, her voice small but clear. The accent was distinctly New York, with the slight roughness that came from the outer boroughs. Victoria couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't process what she was seeing. These children were impossible. She had never had children. She had made that choice deliberately, definitively, 20 years ago. She had chosen her career over everything else, including the one mistake that could have derailed everything she had worked to build. But looking at these girls, Victoria felt the carefully constructed walls around her memories beginning to crumble. 20 years ago, she had been 18, a freshman at Columbia University on a full scholarship. She had been dating Marcus Rivera, a pre-med student with kind eyes and gentle hands. They had been young and careless and desperately in love, or at least she had been. When the pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines, Victoria's world had tilted off its axis. She was 3 months pregnant when she finally worked up the courage to tell Marcus. But by then, he had already received early admission to Johns Hopkins Medical School, his dream within reach. Victoria had seen the momentary panic in his eyes when she told him, the quick calculation of what this news meant for his future. "We'll figure it out," he had said, but Victoria had heard the uncertainty in his voice. She had seen how his excitement about Baltimore dimmed when he looked at her. That night, Victoria had made a decision that would haunt her for the next 20 years. She would have the baby, but she wouldn't tell Marcus it was twins. She would give them up for adoption to a good family, and she would disappear from Marcus's life, letting him pursue his dreams unencumbered by the consequences of their relationship. The pregnancy had been difficult. She had hidden it as long as possible, wearing baggy clothes and avoiding her friends. When she finally couldn't hide it anymore, she had told everyone, including Marcus, that she was transferring to a school in California. Instead, she had moved into a home for unwed mothers in upstate New York, using her mother's maiden name to avoid any connection to her real identity. On a cold February night, Victoria had given birth to twin daughters. She had held them for exactly 5 minutes, memorizing their tiny faces, their perfect fingers, the way they seemed to comfort each other even in those first moments of life. Then she had signed the adoption papers and walked away, believing she was doing the right thing for everyone involved. She had returned to Columbia the following semester, telling everyone she had hated California and decided to come back. She threw herself into her studies with obsessive intensity, graduating summa cum laude with a double major in economics and mathematics. She never spoke to Marcus again, avoiding him on campus and declining all mutual friends' attempts to reunite them. Now, standing in this hospital corridor, Victoria was face to face with the consequences of that decision. These girls, these impossible, beautiful girls, had to be her daughters. The resemblance was too strong, too exact, to be coincidence. "Are you sure you're okay, lady?" the second twin asked, standing up from her chair with concern written across her features. "You look like you saw a ghost." Victoria finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What are your names?" The girls exchanged a glance, the kind of silent communication that only twins share. The first girl answered, "I'm Emma, and this is Sophie. We're waiting for our mom." Emma and Sophie. Victoria's heart clenched. She had chosen those names during the long months of pregnancy, whispering them to her growing belly during the lonely nights in the group home. She had written them on the adoption papers as suggestions, hoping against hope that the adoptive family would honor her choices. "Your mother," Victoria managed, her voice stronger now. "Is she a patient here?" Sophie nodded, her expression growing sad. "She's really sick. The doctors say she might not get better this time." Emma reached for her sister's hand, offering comfort with the instinctive protectiveness that Victoria remembered from her own childhood with her twin sister, Sarah. Sarah, who had died in a car accident when they were 16, leaving Victoria alone in the world with parents who had never wanted children in the first place. "What's wrong with her?" Victoria asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Leukemia," Emma said matter-of-factly, with the kind of clinical detachment that children develop when they've lived with illness for too long. "She's been sick for 2 years now. The treatments aren't working anymore." Victoria felt the floor beneath her feet seem to shift. These girls, her daughters, were about to lose their mother. The woman who had raised them, loved them, given them the stable home that Victoria had been unable to provide, was dying. "Where's your father?" Victoria asked, dreading the answer. Sophie's expression darkened. "We don't have one. Mom always said he was a good man who couldn't be with us, but she never told us why." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with devastating clarity. The adoptive family had only consisted of a single mother, probably someone who had desperately wanted children and had been willing to take on twins when many families would only consider single children. Now that woman was dying, and these girls would be alone. "Girls, are you Emma and Sophie Patterson?" A nurse approached, her expression kind but tired. "Your mom is asking for you." As the twins stood to follow the nurse, Emma turned back to Victoria. "I hope you feel better, lady. You still look really pale." Victoria watched them disappear into the patient room, her mind racing. She needed to find out more. She needed to understand what had happened to the family she had chosen for her daughters, what would happen to the girls now. She approached the nurse's station, where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes was updating patient charts. "Excuse me," Victoria said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The Patterson girls, Emma and Sophie. I'm a family friend. Can you tell me about their situation?" The nurse looked up, studying Victoria's face with the shrewd assessment of someone who had seen every kind of family drama play out in hospital corridors. "Are you listed as an emergency contact?" "No, but I might be able to help. Financially, I mean." Victoria pulled out her business card, knowing that her name and title would open doors that might otherwise remain closed. I run a charitable foundation that assists families dealing with medical crises. The nurse's expression softened as she read the card. Sterling Capital was well known in New York, and Victoria's philanthropic activities, while mostly for tax purposes, were a matter of public record. Catherine Patterson has been fighting acute lymphoblastic leukemia for 3 years, the nurse explained quietly. She's a single mother, adopted the girls as babies. No other family that we know of. The social worker has been involved because we need to plan for the girls' future. Catherine's prognosis isn't good. Victoria felt as though she were drowning. Her daughters, the children she had given away to ensure they would have a better life than she could provide, were about to enter the foster care system. Everything she had sacrificed had been for nothing. What happens to the girls if their mother doesn't recover? Victoria asked. They'll likely be placed in foster care, hopefully together, though that's not always possible with twins. They're good kids, well behaved, but at 8 years old, they're past the age when most families want to adopt. The casual brutality of the statement hit Victoria like a physical blow. Her daughters, her intelligent, beautiful daughters, were destined for the same kind of institutional care that had shaped Victoria's own lonely childhood after Sarah's death. I need to see Mrs. Patterson, Victoria said suddenly. I need to speak with her. The nurse hesitated. She's very weak. Family only, I'm afraid. Victoria's mind worked quickly, falling back on the skills that had made her successful in business. I believe there may be a connection between my foundation and the girl's biological family. It's possible we can provide support that the family wasn't aware was available. It was a lie, but not entirely. Victoria could provide support, just not in the way she was implying. After some discussion with the attending physician, Victoria was allowed a brief visit with Catherine Patterson. She found herself standing outside room 312, her hand trembling as she reached for the door handle. In a few moments, she would be face to face with the woman who had raised her daughters, loved them, been everything to them that Victoria had been too young and too afraid to be. Catherine Patterson was clearly very ill. Her thin frame barely made an impression under the hospital blankets, and her once brown hair had been lost to chemotherapy. But her eyes, when they focused on Victoria, were alert and intelligent. You're not one of the regular volunteers, Catherine observed, her voice weak but curious. The nurses said you wanted to speak with me about the girls. Victoria sat in the visitor's chair, her carefully prepared speech deserting her entirely. How do you tell a dying woman that you're the biological mother of the children she's raised as her own? Mrs. Patterson, my name is Victoria Sterling. I run a charitable foundation, and I believe I may be able to help with Emma and Sophie's future. Catherine's eyes sharpened with interest. What kind of help? Victoria took a deep breath, knowing that what she said next would change everything. 20 years ago, I made a decision that I've regretted every day since. I gave up twins for adoption, girls I named Emma and Sophie. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine stared at Victoria with a mixture of shock, understanding, and something that might have been relief. You're their mother, Catherine whispered. You're their mother, Victoria corrected gently. You're the one who raised them, loved them, taught them to be the remarkable children they are. I'm just the woman who carried them and wasn't brave enough to keep them. Tears began to flow down Catherine's cheeks. I always wondered if this day would come. I hoped it would. The girls ask about their birth parents sometimes. What do you tell them? The truth. That their birth mother was very young and made a difficult decision because she loved them enough to want them to have a better life than she could provide at the time. Victoria felt her own tears threatening. Did they have a better life? Catherine smiled, despite her weakness. They're incredible, Victoria. Emma is artistic and sensitive, always drawing or writing stories. Sophie is fierce and protective, especially of her sister. They're both brilliant, kind, funny. They've brought so much joy to my life. I'm glad, Victoria said, and meant it. I'm grateful to you for giving them everything I couldn't. But now I'm dying, Catherine said bluntly, and they're going to need someone. The social worker talks about foster care, maybe finding them an adoptive family, but they might be separated. I can't bear the thought of them being apart. Victoria leaned forward, her decision crystallizing with startling clarity. What if they didn't have to go to strangers? What if there was family available? Catherine's eyes widened. You want them? I want what's best for them, Victoria said carefully. I'm not the same person I was at 18. I'm successful, financially stable. I could provide for them, ensure they get the best education, the best opportunities. But I'm also a stranger to them. I don't know if I can be what they need. What they need, Catherine said firmly, is someone who will love them unconditionally and never give up on them. The rest can be learned. Over the next hour, Catherine told Victoria everything about her daughters. Their favorite foods, their fears, their dreams. Emma wanted to be an artist or a writer. Sophie talked about becoming a doctor to help sick people like her mom. They both loved swimming and hated Brussels sprouts. They were fiercely loyal to each other and had never spent a night apart. There's something else you should know, Catherine said as Victoria prepared to leave. They know they're adopted. We've always been open about it. They know their birth mother was young and loved them very much. I think knowing that helped them understand that sometimes people make difficult choices out of love. Victoria nodded, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was considering. What do I do now? You meet them properly, Catherine said. Not as a stranger in a hallway, but as someone who cares about their future. Let them get to know you, and give yourself a chance to know them. The rest will follow. That evening, Victoria sat in her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, staring at her phone. She had the contact information for the hospital social worker, but she couldn't bring herself to make the call. Everything about her life would have to change. Her work schedule, her priorities, her carefully controlled existence would be turned upside down. She thought about Emma and Sophie, probably lying in narrow beds at whatever temporary placement the hospital had arranged, wondering what would happen to them next. She thought about Catherine Patterson, fighting her final battle while worrying about her daughter's future. She thought about the 18-year-old girl she had been, terrified and alone, convinced that giving up her babies was the only loving choice she could make. Victoria had spent 20 years building walls around her heart, convincing herself that she was better off alone, that emotional attachments were weaknesses that successful people couldn't afford. But those two little girls with her eyes and her stubborn chin had shattered those walls in an instant. She picked up her phone and dialed. Ms. Rodriguez? This is Victoria Sterling. I understand you're handling the Patterson case. I believe I may be able to provide a permanent solution for Emma and Sophie's placement. The process was complex and emotionally exhausting. There were meetings with social workers, psychological evaluations, background checks, and legal procedures. Victoria had to prove not only that she was the girl's biological mother, but that she was capable of providing a stable, loving home. The hardest part was telling Emma and Sophie the truth. Victoria had insisted on honesty from the beginning, believing that they deserved to know who she was and why she was suddenly in their lives. They met in Catherine's hospital room 3 days after Victoria's first visit. Catherine had prepared the girls as much as possible, explaining that their birth mother had been found and wanted to meet them. Victoria sat awkwardly in the visitor's chair, more nervous than she had ever been in any boardroom negotiation. Emma and Sophie perched on the edge of their mother's bed, studying Victoria with curious, wary eyes. Girls, Catherine said gently, this is Victoria Sterling. She's the woman who gave birth to you. The silence that followed felt eternal. Victoria watched a dozen emotions flicker across the twins' faces: confusion, curiosity, anger, hope. Finally, Emma spoke. Why did you give us away? The question was direct and devastating. Victoria had prepared for it, but hearing it from her daughter's lips made her throat close with emotion. Because I was 18 years old, scared, and alone, Victoria said honestly. I thought I was doing what was best for you. I wanted you to have a family who could give you everything I couldn't. But you're rich now, Sophie observed with 8-year-old logic. You could have gotten rich and then come back for us. Victoria smiled despite her tears. "You're right. I could have tried to find you sooner. I was afraid you wouldn't want to know me, that I would just disrupt your lives." "Our mom is dying," Emma said bluntly. "Our lives are already disrupted." Over the following weeks, Victoria began spending time with the girls. At first, their interactions were stilted and awkward. Victoria had no idea how to talk to children, what they liked, how to relate to them. But slowly, tentatively, they began to build connections. She learned that Emma loved to draw, creating elaborate fantasy worlds filled with magical creatures and brave princesses. Victoria bought her professional art supplies and arranged for private lessons with a renowned children's art instructor. Sophie was fascinated by Victoria's work, asking endless questions about stocks and investments and business strategies. Victoria found herself explaining complex financial concepts in simple terms, amazed by her daughter's quick understanding. Most importantly, Victoria learned about their relationship with each other. The twins were truly bonded in the way that only twins could be, communicating in half sentences and meaningful glances, protecting each other with fierce loyalty. Catherine passed away on a rainy Thursday in October, surrounded by the three people who had come to matter most to her. Victoria held her hand as she died, promising to love and protect Emma and Sophie for the rest of her life. The funeral was small but meaningful. Victoria had arranged everything, determined to honor the woman who had raised her daughters with such love and dedication. Emma and Sophie stood between Victoria and the social worker, holding hands as they said goodbye to the only mother they had ever known. The transition to living with Victoria was not easy. The girls grieved deeply for Catherine, and Victoria struggled to balance her need to comfort them with her own inexperience as a parent. There were tears, arguments, and moments when Victoria wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. But there were also breakthrough moments. The first time Emma showed Victoria a drawing she had made of their new family. The night Sophie crawled into Victoria's bed during a thunderstorm, seeking comfort. The morning Victoria woke up to find both girls in her kitchen, attempting to make pancakes for her birthday. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, they became a family. Victoria's work life changed dramatically. She delegated more responsibilities, turned down international trips that would take her away from the girls for more than a few days, and moved her office to her apartment so she could be available when they came home from school. Her colleagues were initially shocked by the transformation. Victoria Sterling, the ice queen of Wall Street, was suddenly leaving meetings early for parent-teacher conferences and bringing homemade cookies to office parties. But Victoria found that her new priorities didn't make her less effective at work. If anything, she became more focused, more efficient, more creative in her problem-solving. Having something more important than work to protect gave her a clarity and purpose she had never experienced before. 6 months after Catherine's death, Victoria sat in the audience at Emma and Sophie's school holiday concert. Emma played violin in the school orchestra, while Sophie had a speaking part in the winter pageant. Victoria watched her daughters perform with a pride so fierce it took her breath away. After the concert, as they walked to the car through the December snow, Sophie slipped her hand into Victoria's. "Mom," she said casually, using the title for the first time, "can we get hot chocolate on the way home?" Victoria stopped walking, overwhelmed by the simple word that meant everything. "Of course we can, sweetheart." Emma took Victoria's other hand. "Thanks for coming to our concert, Mom. Catherine would have liked that you were there." Victoria squeezed both their hands, her heart full to overflowing. "She was there," she said softly. "She's always there, because she's part of who you are." As they walked to the car together, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 20 years ago, she had made a decision based on fear and the belief that love meant letting go. Now she understood that sometimes love meant holding on, fighting for what mattered, and being brave enough to build something new from the pieces of what was broken. Her daughters had taught her that success wasn't measured in dollars or deals or power over others. It was measured in bedtime stories and scraped knees kissed better and the fierce joy of watching someone you love discover their own strength. Victoria Sterling had spent 20 years building an empire. But her greatest achievement was learning to be a mother to the daughters who had always been part of her heart, even when they were apart. The hospital corridor where everything had changed was just a memory now. But sometimes, when Victoria passed Mount Sinai on her way to work, she remembered that moment when time stopped and her world tilted off its axis. It had been the most terrifying and the most beautiful moment of her life, the moment when her past and her future collided and created something neither could have imagined alone. Her daughters, her impossible, miraculous daughters, had saved her from a life that was successful but hollow. And in return, Victoria had promised them something she had never been able to give herself, the security of knowing that they would never be alone again.